This is Brother Bob Trask, and we're doing a video interview today. Want to get a little bit of background as to why he began on his path for spiritual growth and development. And so I thought if you could just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about whatever might have triggered events or a situation, what happened, and then how it changed your life.
John, I think now as I look back from the tender age of 76 years old, that I was actually born to be spiritually awake and to some degree enlightened. When I say to some degree enlightened, I think that enlightenment is a path rather than a goal, but I think I'm a ways along on that path, and I think it's because I've spent my entire life looking for ways to be more fulfilled, more satisfied with what I now know is spirituality. For many, many years I didn't know that. My earliest upbringing, my earliest teachings that I remember most fondly were from Native Americans in New Mexico, where I was a boy, and later working with Native Americans in a pueblo and doing my first spirit quest and getting my spirit name, and all of that was really, really important to me and really solid, felt really balanced. But I got away from that, and for a very large part of my life followed a strict Christian belief, and that Christian belief was actually one in which I saw Jesus as having come on earth to die for my sins, which, two things. One, it supposes that Jesus would die for my sins, or that even in the act of dying that would be enough to atone for my sins. But it also supposes that I have sins. And I've since come to realize that neither one of those is true. That Jesus was in fact a great teacher, an incredible teacher, a leader who led by word but also by example. And when I stop looking at him as a savior and start seeing him as a Messiah, as a teacher, then things come together. But none of this really came together for me until I went through a hurricane in the Sea of Cortez as a sea captain. And during that hurricane, an amazing thing happened. I knew at a certain point that my ship was going to sink and that all my passengers and crew were going to be lost.
Could I just stop you? How old were you when that happened, and what was your position on the ship?
I was the captain, and that was in 1974. I think I was about 36 years old. I had floated along for quite a few years, no longer believing in a Christian God or even in God the Father, feeling really that praying to that entity was just like throwing marbles into the ocean. It was just useless. But in that hurricane, I came to a place where I knew all was lost, and I knew that the ship was lost. And strangely enough, had absolutely no fear of death, of my death, because I was so preoccupied with that my crew and my passengers would die. And as a captain, I got them into that situation. The buck stops definitely at the feet of the captain on a ship. And I had gotten them into that position, and now we were going to all be lost. And so I found myself praying to God, sort of looking up into the sky and praying to God. And this is a much longer story and much more deep and intense story. But just for the purposes of brevity, I'll say that I just looked up in the sky and said, God, please help me. And at that moment, I remembered that there was no God. At that moment, I remembered that I had prayed and prayed and prayed to this entity in the sky so many times, and it just wasn't there. And at that point, I actually let go of what we think of as God, the man with the long hair and the robe on the clouds. I just let go of that. I just saw that as a superstition, as a fantasy, and I just let it go. And I thought I'd let it go before, but I hadn't. And now I completely let it go. I just erased it. It no longer existed for me. And at that moment, I felt myself surrounded by a presence. It felt to me as though someone were standing behind me and had arms around me, not touching, but just the warmth of those arms around me. I felt so protected and so safe and so belonging. I'd never, since I was a kid, I'd never really felt like I belonged somewhere. Like I had a being, like I had a value. But all of that came in that great presence that surrounded me. And I didn't see lights or hear voices or any of that stuff. It was just a presence. And then that presence said to me, in thoughts in my own mind, now if you'll stay out of the way, and by stay out of the way, I knew very clearly that that meant get my ego out of the way, which I had quite a large one. The message was, if you will just get yourself out of the way, I'll help you get through this. And so I said, I'm out of the way. Okay, I'm out of the way. And so I then was guided step by step by step by step through a process that saved my ship and all my passengers and my crew. And the story is quite a lengthy one, but I did things you can't do with the ship, that you can't do with a boat. And then I was in port, this was in Mexico, and I was under port arrest for about 6 weeks. And while I was incarcerated, I had a lot of time to think. And incidentally, it wasn't that I did anything wrong. It was just that the local people thought that maybe they could get a lot of money if they imprisoned me and my crew, and said that they wouldn't release us until we paid them $50,000. And eventually, I think the owners of the ship did pay them $50,000, and we got released. But during that period of time, I had a chance to really look at my life and look at it in view of this new reality, of this new consciousness. And I could never go back. So I just started talking to people about what I saw and what I believed and what I feel about life. And that expanded and kept expanding until I had training programs for personal empowerment and spiritual development going on in many parts of the United States, and eventually in 13 other countries, and eventually several 100,000 people were coming into this training, and it was exciting. And now I find myself being the minister of the Bellingham Spiritual Center, the Unity Spiritual Center in Bellingham, Washington. And I'm surrounded by saints and angels every day, really incredible people, and we're doing really good things. So anyway, that, in a nutshell, that's my story. That's how I got to where I am right now.
So this one event really got you to thinking, really changed your life very dramatically. Do you still feel that presence that had its arms around you in that hurricane?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I really do. I mean, now that's consistent. Now that's with me all the time, and it's also pretty treacherous. It's probably not the right word, but that's the word that comes to my mind. It's pretty treacherous because before I could go off and play my ego games, and and just could pretend that I was right, or even think that I was right, or how I saw reality was the way it was. And now, when I step into that, it's pretty dramatic. I mean, the contrast between being in the Spirit, of being one with reality, and pretending that I've got a separate reality that's more important. The contrast between those two is pretty severe, and I don't get away with it at all. It's too painful. So it holds me in check. And I do feel, even as I'm speaking here now, I just feel so grateful and so loved and so empowered by that spiritual being.
Wow, that's great.